Hey VC, it's Mazzy here. And after all those CD box sets, I'm really going into heavy vinyl mode again. We're starting with Cal Tjader, greatest hits. Soul Sauce, Latin music. I just want to showcase some Latin and Latin influenced albums. I think it's a really important time to acknowledge this wonderful music. It's not all from Mexico, it's Mexico, South American, Cuban, and some is influenced. Some are great gringo players being influenced by the Latin sounds and have made amazing records to introduce it to the rest of us. And this is first Cal Tjader. I'm going to end with some jazz things. I'm going to start with some more rock pop things. Cal Tjader's a vibe player that really did a lot of sort of fusion, jazzy pop tunes. I used to see him back in the 70s, and he played around in San Francisco a lot. I believe he lived there for some time too. But great stuff. I mean, you can hear the influence of a lot of bands, including bands like Santana. There's artists like Latin artists like Tito Puente that influence those artists as well. And so I'm going to showcase some of those. Part of it is too, when I lived in San Francisco all my life up until 5 years ago when I came here to Seattle, and for 25 of those years, up until 5 years ago, I lived in the Mission District, which is a neighborhood that's around 40 to 50% Latino, from South America, Mexico, all down that area. And my neighbors, people in the neighborhood, in the shops I frequented, in the cafes, restaurants, very heavy Latin population. And I tell you, it's the best place I've lived in my entire life. So, without further ado, Mazzy is going to show the VC some Latin influenced records from my collection. I have a lot more CDs too, but I'm not going to show those this time. Now this is the kind of music that makes you want to get up off your ass and shake your ass a bit. But I'll go through these quickly. I may do a little background. I actually got into, was influenced with not even knowing it. A lot of the garage, not a lot, but a good number of garage bands from 65, 66 with some hot singles were Latin based. Who knew? Question Mark and the Mysterians, who did 96 Tears, Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs, who did Wooly Bully, Little Red Riding Hood, Sam, Latin descent, Sir Douglas Quintet. Doug Sahm isn't Latin, but the whole Austin-based border towns, and even though Austin's not a border town, but the whole Texan-Mexican, Tex-Mex fusion with Doug Sahm, Sir Douglas Quintet, and even Doug Sahm's albums, which I don't even have here, but there's a lot of those things that really were heavily influenced. Augie Myers, organ playing on those on those Sir Douglas Quintet records, right there alone. But obviously, probably the most famous one that all us Americans know is Santana Braxas, which, is partly sung in Spanish, partly sung in English, heavy percussive influences. We're talking now about the 50th anniversary of Woodstock. Just the percussion in Soul Sacrifice that Santana, they basically became famous from their performance there with Mike Shreve on drums and Jose, let's see, I'm blanking out, but Chapito Arias and the artist, the percussiveness of that band. But Oye Como Va was a song written by Tito Puente, so they cover that in this great album. But Michael Carabello is music on here as well. So great album. You know, there's nothing I need to say about Abraxas, but one of the great Latin American influences. And Carlos Santana, born in Mexico, came to the States when he was young, grew up in San Francisco in the Mission District. There's a great mural on 21st Street in Mission of Carlos that was painted on the wall in the last 4 years. Another one of my favorite bands that I mentioned, I think in my, I did mention in my CD box set video, was Los Lobos. Now, this album in particular, they did 2 or 3 albums, La Pistola y El Corazón, and it's entirely sung in Spanish. Gorgeous, gorgeous record, so I highly recommend it. Aside from this, I consider How Will the Wolves Survive their best album, but I just wanted to show this. This is all sung in English, but Los Lobos, one of the great, from East LA, one of the great Mexican-American rock bands, in my opinion, but Los Lobos is there. Another band from LA area that's around now, kind of in their pop punky, not even punky, but way, indie band is Chicano Batman. I've seen them 3 times, and fun band live. Good record, they're better live, and at some point I hope they capture their real live essence. But Chicano Batman is another wonderful Latin-infused rock band. You know, we can't show this without showing Linda Ronstadt. Now, Linda Ronstadt has Mexican blood in her. From Arizona, this is the first album. I'm not sure if it's the only album, but she did all in Spanish, despite the arguments from a record company. You know, what's great about Linda Ronstadt is she did what she wanted to do on her terms. She did rock, she did country, she did Latin, she did the pop standards, you know, with Nelson Riddle in the orchestra. But this is one gorgeous record. You can find this pretty cheap in the used bin. There's a great documentary on Linda Ronstadt coming out, but I highly recommend this record. It's a gorgeous record. It's produced by Peter Asher and Ruben, her longtime manager, producer, and Ruben Fuentes. And all sung in Spanish. Gorgeous, gorgeous record. Okay, the next artist is going to lead me into several areas. Here's one of the gringos in the group, but I haven't said enough. I've said too much about Ry Cooder from Santa Monica, California. But he introduced me to a lot of Latin music in the early 70s as well. And out of all his albums, I'd say Paradise and Lunch is the one with the biggest Latin influence. Flaco Jimenez, who's the accordion player, but not, what do they call it? It's not the accordion, but it's like an accordion. From Texas, American Born, is all over this record, has toured with them for the last, on and off for the last 40 years. I think I've seen him 6-7 times when, with Flaco, and Flaco really makes this. But the songs aren't Latin per se, but there's Latin Mexican influence throughout this. That Tejana, Texana, hybrid of rock, soul, polka, which is very influenced in that type of music. But great, great, great record. And going right from this, in fact, before I get to Flaco, I have some Flaco records here. I got to get a little political, or it's more social, I guess, in a way. I have on order, and it's coming next month, finally on vinyl from Nonsuch Records, is Chavez Ravine. This is a Ry Cooder record. He did an LA trilogy on CD in the mid-2000s, and you should look it up if you are interested in American history, in American political, social, geographic history, and about Los Angeles. Chavez Ravine, some of you may know, it's where Dodger Stadium is now. But there's a whole political story beyond it where that area of land was Mexican migrants, families, workers, and basically a combination of the politicos of LA at the time in the late 40s and 50s, and the man, in terms of development, basically bulldozed. They bought out some of the property owners, but they bulldozed the land to build Dodger Stadium, and it goes beyond that. So this record is very political, very social, very geographic by Ry Cooder, and tells that story. What's great about it, he went back and he found a number living still of Latin artists, musicians, singers, players who are still alive or who lived in that area and are from that area. So this is storytelling at its best, social change and disruption at its best. Chavez Ravine is an amazing record, but it tells the whole thing of redevelopment and eminent domain in property rights. I know people hate when myself and others get in the political side of it here, and it's, I guess you could say it's ancient history now, going back 60 years, 70 years. But it's a fabulous story. There's also documentaries on this, but this is a record by Ry Cooder. It's coming out by Nonsense Record on vinyl early September. I've pre-ordered it, and I am excited about that. But as I said, Flaco. 2 records of Flaco. This is a promo copy I have of Flaco El Sonde de San Antonio, which is on Arhoolie Records, and it was produced by Chris Strockwitz and Flaco. And this is another album that Chris was an executive producer on, that's on Arhoolie also. So the whole thing about this type of music, it's really a hybrid of polka and Latin flavor, and something I would literally hear blasting in my neighborhood out of the yards and cafes and restaurants in the Mission District in San Francisco. And years ago, way back, I fell in love with this type of music. It's just wonderful. And this is the sound of San Antonio, so San Antonio, Texas. So great records, Flaco Jimenez. Seen him many times and on his own. And speaking of Ry Cooder too, we can thank Ry Cooder for bringing us the Buena Vista Social Club. Cuban musicians kind of resurrected their career, found their career, went down to Mexico, put this together with a documentary by director Wim Wenders, and made a wonderful record, wonderful music. It's amazing. This record sold more than any other Ry Cooder record. Not surprising, obviously, but he produced this and brought this to the masses. Now, you could have a whole other conversation about the gringo artist of any genre bringing music from other countries and sort of stealing the souls of artists and bringing it here. A lot of people wanted to dump on Paul Simon because of Graceland with African music, and you know, people didn't get quite like that with Ry Cooder here, but you know, these, and the same with Paul Simon with Urubamba, a South American troupe that he used with Simon and Garfunkel in their version of El Condor Pasa on Bridge Over Troubled Water album. But the way I look at it, and it's easy for me to say, it's introducing this music to a wider audience that would never have heard it before. I mean, I go back, and I've said this many times on my channel about George Harrison introducing the world to Indian music. Now, he didn't invent the sitar, he didn't discover Ravi Shankar, but he certainly introduced Ravi Shankar in Indian music because of the use of the sitar originally on Rubber Soul. He introduced that music to a larger audience. In a way, to the dismay, not to the dismay really, but I think Ravi Shankar was always upset that from that point on, after 1967, I think, in movies and they really associated sitars with smoking pot and the drug scene and psychedelia. And every time in the movies in the late 60s there was something, if it wasn't a rock and roll fuzz tone guitar, you'd have a sitar. You'd have Indian music showing, you know, psychedelic, druggy hippies and things. But anyway, Buena Vista Social Club, obviously the documentary is worth taking, and all these artists really did a number of solo artists, solo records, which I have on CD, not on album. But again, continuing with the Latin music, of again, not just North America, South America, Cuba, and the like. Great, great stuff. You all know this one, and if you don't, this is one album you should have. Now, I'm only including Joan Baez because she's the daughter of, her father was from Mexico. This is her first album. There is one Spanish number, El Preso Numero 9, pushing the number 9 in Espanol. Yo hablo español pero muy poquito, and I know I'll embarrass myself if I go any further, but living in a heavily Latin neighborhood, you kind of learn, and you converse as much as you can, which I think is a wonderful cultural part of this country and what's great about America. Yeah, I'm getting a little political here just because. Anyway, Joan Baez. Now again, I'm fusing music. Again, the Gringos again. One of my favorite bands of the last, 15 years is Calexico. Are they from Arizona, I believe, or New Mexico? I'm blanking out. But they really fuse border music with spaghetti western soundtrack type of thing, which sounds more Italian, but very Latin influence. Obviously, urban Latin culture in their artwork. They've used Latin artists on a number of their records. But Calexico, I've seen them live 3 times. In fact, I've showcased one of their new albums. Their newest album is a collaboration with Iron and Wine, Sam Beam from Iron and Wine, which is, again, it's becoming one of my favorite albums of the year. But Tucson, Arizona is where they're based. And I'd say these two, the Blacklight and Hot Rail, are 2 of my favorites from the, what year is this? This is 2000, this is about, I don't know, this is probably the mid-2000s as well. 2005, I believe. Well, this is a 2018 reissue. So this is probably still available. This might be too. But these are really great albums, and Calexico brings that sort of Latin experience as well. Now, moving into jazz, and again, fusing ethnic fusions, jazz, Afro-Cuban. I'd say one of the pioneers of that, obviously, is Machito, but Chico O'Farrill, but Dizzy Gillespie really kind of brought that to the forefront, going down to Cuba, doing records with a lot of the musicians down in Cuba. Also, this is a great record, Kenny Dorham, Afro-Cuban. Blue Note number 1535. Now, if you can wait one moment, I'm going to put this on because that Cal Tjader record ended, and I think we need a little bit of Dizzy Gillespie's Blowin'. This is one of my, wow, I just realized something. Anyway, one moment. Ba-da-ba, da-da-da-da. Rojo, blanca y azul, que bonita es mi bandera. Okay, Lástima, Afro-Cuban jazz. It does make you want to shake it, huh? This is a Music Matters Jazz album of that. So, okay. Moving again into a little more jazz. Again, this is not a definitive overview of Latin music, but I'm just pulling some of my collection. I keep going back to some records that I really love. Now, Chick Corea with Return to Forever. Chick Corea, the fusion master, the solo piano master. Obviously, something titled Spanish Heart has very, very Spanish influences. And Gorgeous Package, and album title, album artwork. One of my favorites. Again, I see this a lot in bins because It's the 70s, sort of mid-70s period. But great record. It's got, who's on this? But recorded it in 1976 it came out. So, Jean-Luc Ponty, Stanley Clarke, Chick Corea, you know? Bob Ludwig mastered this. So this is an RL, and it sounds so wonderful. Anyway, Chick Corea, who also, you know, did Return to Forever, which is not totally Latin based, although singing in Return to Forever on their early albums was Flora Purim from Brazil. Flora Purim was married to Airto. Now they're Brazilian. This is mixing a whole other country, and I could go on and on with Black Orpheus soundtrack and the whole, I mean, you can go on and on this. You know, there's so many rich musical heritage in the various countries of South America. I think a lot of people, unfortunately, are ignorant and think it's all one place, and it ain't. But this Flora Purim album is a little more fusion, but it's great. She's got a great voice. Return to Forever, Light as a Feather, is one of my favorites with her on it. And the first Return to Forever with the on ECM Records, both of them. One's ECM Polydor, and has her and has the bird flying on the cover. Cuban artist Monte Santa Maria did a lot of commercial records on Columbia as well. Like I think I showed one of Watermelon Man. He did a lot of pop hits with a Latin influence with his band. But El Pussycat, this has Hubert Laws and Roger Grant and Marty Scheller. Monte Santa Maria is a leader and bongo drums, and he had a lot of great records. So this is just fun music. Any of his records are great. Mostly, I think, pretty much on Columbia Records. Now, Stan Getz didn't invent bossa nova, right, by any stretch of the imagination, but he brought together João Gilberto, Astrid Gilberto, and they did a series of records that the whole bossa nova craze in the early 60s became huge, with Girl from Ipanema, and so anything by João Gilberto, Astrid Gilberto, the Stan Getz, I think there's a trilogy at least, maybe more of these kind of records. These are on Verve, Creed Taylor produced. Great records, you all know them. This is one that you all need in your jazz. I mean, if you want, you know, there's plenty of other people who've done videos on, you know, 10 jazz albums you should have. This is jazz pop at its best, something you should need. And then just a spin off of that, I'm showing it only because this is a later overview, probably this is late 70s or 1980, of João Gilberto orchestrated, who works on that Stan Getz album with him. So, there you go. Not a definitive one, there's other better ones, but it's something I have. And I'm gonna end up with an album, again, 2 albums actually. First jazz album, it's something that just is so wonderfully Spanish influenced, not by Spanish artists, but with Gil Evans and Miles Davis, Sketches of Spain. It's like a perfect jazz classical piece of music. Just a gorgeous record. It's a MoFi copy I have, but any copy, you need a copy of Sketches of Spain. Very classical, and it brings me back, or brings me not back, but to Spanish music with Andres Segovia. That's who I'm going to end with. One of the greatest classical flamenco guitar players of all time, Segovia. One of those guys like Mazzy, like Maslov. All you need to say is Segovia. You don't have to say Andres Segovia. You don't have to say Norman Maslov. You just say Mazzy or Maslov. It works that way sometimes with some of us. But Andres Segovia, that's it. So this is sort of a mini tribute, a mini introduction to some Latin music and Latin American rock, jazz, folk. Just beautiful music from a beautiful culture. Thanks for watching, and suggest Latin music to me. Richard Riley and I both are fans of Gabby Moreno. She has a new album coming out on Nonsense next month that sounds gorgeous, and she does a cover of the Ry Cooder co-written song called Borderline that was used in the Jack Nicholson movie. It's a stunning. Search out that new video, and it's produced by Van Dyke Parks, and he's all over it. Bizarre, wild, beautiful, wonder orchestration with a great guitar solo by Ry Cooder. I'll be showcasing that next month when that comes out too. So take care, VC. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening, and Mazzy loves you. Bye now.